For those of you who I have not yet had the good fortune to meet, my name is Tony Penny, and I'm the director of the Walter and Lenore Annenberg Presidential Learning Center. And I invite you to please stand and welcome Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. And now, in honor of the men and women in uniform, both past and present, who have fought so valiantly to preserve our freedom, I'm going to invite a couple of our student guests up on the stage to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance today. So if I could ask Caitlin Drake and Monica Garcia to please come up on stage here. And if I could ask that you all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. You may be seated. Thank you very much. Before we get started today, I wanted to recognize a few of our special guests that are in the audience with us. From the Ronald Reagan Centennial Commission, we have the Honorable Martin Garrick. We also have from the Centennial Commission, Ms. Denise Lynn Nielsen. And Marie Joyce, who's here with us as well. We have the Executive Director of the Campaign for the Civic Mission of Schools, Mr. Ted McConnell. And the Executive Director of iCivics.org, Mr. Gene Koo, is here. The Executive Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, Mr. John Heybusch. The Director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library, Mr. Duke Blackwood. And the many other leaders in the field of civics and education who join us today from both across California and across the country. Thank you for coming. But I also want to address my opening remarks today to our final group of VIPs, the more than 700 students and teachers who join us from all over Los Angeles and Ventura counties today, and the many students from classrooms across the country who are joining us online. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy academic schedules to be a part of this important discussion, so thank you. Now, there are many of us in the room today who dedicate our lives to the cultivation of proactive, informed, educated, and conscientious citizens and leaders. We believe, as Americans from Thomas Jefferson to Ronald Reagan have believed, that in a nation that governs itself, a nation like ours, it is essential that the voters, and of course those of you who will very soon be voters, must be both informed about and engaged with public affairs. We live in an era when schools are designed to prepare you for 2 C's, college and career. But there are many of us who believe that just as important as these is a 3rd C, citizenship, because the way in which you utilize your education and your career to help contribute both to your communities and the nation at large affects us all. We live in an era when you are, through standardized testing, held accountable for your ability to read and write, but many of us believe that just as important as these basic academic skills are the reasoning and civic skills you'll need to do your part to ensure that our nation continues to grow and prosper. If we were to examine closely the vital signs of the civic health of our nation, we would find many a symptom that would lead a pessimist to assume the worst. The pessimist might point out that only 64.5% of high school graduates voted in the 2008 election, and that if you look at people who did not graduate from high school, that number dropped to 31%. The pessimist would point out that according to the nation's report card, 1/3 of 12th grade students could not correctly identify the purpose of the Bill of Rights. The pessimists would point to the fact that only 7% of our 8th graders could correctly identify the 3 branches of government. The pessimists would look at these symptoms and say, that's it. There's no hope for this country. Well, today, in the house that Ronald Reagan built, and in the presence of Civics' greatest champion, you'll forgive me if I don't succumb to the dire warnings of the pessimists. Because President Reagan was not a pessimist. He often told a story that illustrated the difference between pessimism and optimism. I'm going to share that story with you now. So there was a family, and they had 2 sons. One was an incurable pessimist. The other son was an unwavering optimist. And the parents thought that these are both a little too extreme. Let's see if we can bring them both a little more towards the center. And they had a family friend who was a psychiatrist, and they approached this friend, and he said, I have just the cure for you. I want you to bring your sons back to me tomorrow. We're going to do a little experiment. We're going to set up 2 rooms. For the pessimist, we're going to take him into a room, and we're going to fill that room with the latest technology, the greatest gadgets, the most amazing toys you've ever seen in your whole life. And we're going to tell the pessimist, this whole room, everything in it, is for you. And for your optimistic son, well, I have some friends, and they run a stable. And at the end of each and every week, we have to clean out that stable. So in that other room, we're going to take everything that we clean out of the stable from all those horses, and we're just going to cover the entire room with it. And we'll take him in there and we'll say, this is all for you. And that'll cure his optimism. So the parents agreed to this plan, which might put them up on charges today, but the parents agreed to this plan. And they said, all right. So the next day they brought their 2 sons back, and they took their pessimistic son and they put him in the room with all the gadgets and all the toys and said, this is all for you. They took the optimistic son, they put him in the room with all the stable stuff and said, this is all for you. And they said, all right, let's let him sit in there for about 15 minutes. We'll come back. They should be cured. So about 15 minutes later, they come back. They walk into the room with the pessimist first. They open the door, and there, curled in a ball on the floor, crying his eyes out, is the pessimist. And they say, well, what's wrong? How can you possibly be upset? Look at all this amazing technology and video games and toys and all the things you could possibly want. And the son looks up, and through tears, he says, I just know that somebody's going to come and take all this away from me. And they say, all right, well, apparently that didn't work. Let's go check in on the optimist. And so they go into the room with the optimist, and there he is. He's knee-deep, and he's throwing handful after handful over his shoulders. And they're wondering, what is going on with this kid? And they say, what are you doing? And he turns around, and he is smiling from ear to ear. And he says, there's got to be a pony in here somewhere. So, despite the alarming statistics that I just shared with you, and despite the worrisome trend of decreasing, de-emphasizing, or sometimes eliminating altogether classroom instruction in the civics and social studies, despite all this, it is because of the remarkable work of Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and the many who have been inspired by her that we continue to believe deep in our hearts that somewhere is a pony. Sandra Day O'Connor was born in El Paso, Texas, and grew up on a cattle ranch near Duncan, Arizona called the Lazy Bee, where her pets included a bobcat and 2 javelinas. She graduated near the top of her class from high school in El Paso and then went to Stanford University, where she received a degree in economics. She continued at Stanford Law School, where one of her classmates was future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, William Rehnquist. Despite her stellar academic credentials, when she graduated, not a single law firm in California offered her a position because of her gender, although she did receive one offer as a legal secretary. And apparently this did not sit too well with her, because Justice O'Connor went on to break a number of gender-based barriers and to inspire young women both across the country and around the world to utilize their intellect and ability to serve at the highest levels of government. Following a 3-year stint in Germany with her husband John, who had been drafted into the Army, the O'Connors returned to Arizona and had 3 sons. In Arizona, she served as an assistant state attorney general for a while before being appointed and then reelected as a state senator. In the Senate, she became the first woman in the history of the United States to be the majority leader of a legislative body. Later, she was elected judge of the Maricopa County Superior Court and then appointed to the Arizona Court of Appeals. 2 years later, President Ronald Reagan nominated Justice O'Connor to replace the retiring Justice Potter Stewart. In his remarks announcing his intention to nominate her, he said, As the press has accurately pointed out, during my campaign for the presidency, I made a commitment that one of my first appointments to the Supreme Court vacancy would be the most qualified woman that I could possibly find. Now, this is not to say that I would appoint a woman merely to do so. That would not be fair to women, nor to future generations of all Americans whose lives are so deeply affected by the decisions of the court. Rather, I pledge to appoint a woman who meets the very high standards that I demand of all court appointees. For a quarter of a century, Justice O'Connor served on the court and in many cases cast the deciding vote. Some called her the swing vote, but I think that Justice O'Connor might prefer the most reasonable vote. Now that she's retired, Justice O'Connor is busier than ever. She is a champion for civics education. As a result, there's a law named after her in Florida called the Sandra Day O'Connor Civics Education Act, and there's currently a bill before the U.S. House of Representatives that bears her name. As founder of the iCivics website, she has strived to engage and inform students at all age levels. She's a highly sought-after public speaker, and from what I hear from a teacher I recently met from Sandra Day O'Connor High School in Arizona, she is even the occasional guest teacher. So please join me in welcoming Justice Sandra Day O'Connor to the stage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, now sit down. You've already heard everything I was going to tell you, so I could probably sit down too. I'm not sure. Is this thing working? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm so glad all of you are here because you are precisely the people I've been concerned about in this country. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today. You've already heard part of it. I'm now an unemployed cowgirl, is what I am. He could have made a much shorter introduction. I grew up on a cattle ranch on the New Mexico-Arizona border, and we were 35 miles from the nearest town. We only went to town once a week so we could get the mail and get some groceries, pay the bills, and then go back to the ranch. And it was really marvelous out there. I loved living on that ranch, and I sort of grew up on the back of a horse, but I don't ride much anymore. I've reached the stage where I get kind of stiff and not feeling too good with that. When President Reagan, and we're celebrating what, the 30th anniversary of the Reagan administration this year, imagine that. And when he was running for the presidency 30 years ago, he wasn't sure that he was making headway with women voters. He thought, well, that was somewhat questionable. And so he started saying occasionally, now if I'm president, when I'm elected, he didn't say if, when I'm elected president, if I get a chance to fill a vacancy on the US Supreme Court, I'd like to put a qualified woman on. His attorney general, when he was elected president, his first one was William French Smith, a wonderful lawyer from the Los Angeles area. And Bill Smith told me some years later that one of the things he did when he went to Washington and started serving was to make a little list of women judges in the country. And he had both Republicans and Democrats on that list, but it was a very short list. You know why? There weren't many women judges. That's why. Very, very few. Now that's been a while, but really, women had not held many judicial positions around the country. And there were a few more Democrats than Republicans on that little list of his. He said he kept the list under the phone at the Department of Justice. He showed me one time I had lunch at the department. He showed me the phone, showed me where he kept the list. And President Reagan had not been in office more than about 4 months when Justice Potter Stewart announced his retirement. And that meant there was going to be a vacancy to be filled. And they started looking at the list, and because it was so short, it didn't take them too long before they saw, well, here's a Republican woman. And they sort of thought that might be better than naming a Democrat, since he'd just been recently elected as a Republican. So they sent people out to Arizona to investigate me and also to talk to me and see what they thought. And I remember when that crew was there, it included Ken Starr. Remember Ken Starr? He was in that group that came to Arizona. And I fixed lunch for him, and we talked most of the day. And he went back, and it must not have been a totally negative report, because a short time thereafter, I was invited to go back to Washington and to talk to some of the people in the White House who were the president's closest associates and helpers. And we spent a morning at a hotel suite in Washington that they had rented for the occasion, and all those people got to talk to me and see what they thought. And then the Attorney General said, well, we'd like to get you to the White House at 4 o'clock to meet the president. I really didn't know Washington, D.C. I had never worked there or really been there. And I said, well, okay, where is it? How do I get there? So I was staying in a motel off of DuPont Circle someplace. So the Attorney General said, well, I'll get my secretary to pick you up. And so that's what we did. She was driving some kind of a green Chevrolet or something, and I stood on the corner on DuPont Circle in DC, and she came by and picked me up, and we drove to the White House, and we waited a while in the outer office for the president's office, and eventually I was called in, and we had a nice conversation. We really did. He was such a delightful person to talk to, very upbeat and positive. And he was more interested, I tell you, in my ranch background than anything else. He loved to ride horseback. And Nancy Reagan was a rider too. So I think that was of prime interest, to tell you the truth. But I guess the rest of it checked out satisfactorily anyway for the event. And when I left after about an hour or so, I went to the Reagan now called Reagan Airport, it wasn't then, and got on a plane to fly back to Phoenix, and I breathed a big sigh of relief. And I said, well, to myself, what an interesting day to visit the White House, to be in the Oval Office, to meet the president, to be there with his closest advisors. And thank goodness I don't have to go do that job, because I could not believe that he would ask me to do it. I just couldn't. I just thought that was not realistic at all. So I went back and told my husband all about the visit. He said, oh, he'll pick you. I said, no, he won't, he can't. So not too long after, my phone rang. I was at my chambers on the Court of Appeals in Arizona. Phone rang, it was Ronald Reagan on the phone. Sandra, I'd like to announce your appointment on Monday. Is that all right with you? Oh dear. That was one frightening moment. I don't scare easily. But that was a concern, because it's exciting to be the first to do something, but I did not want to be the last. And if I took that job and did a lousy job, it might be a very long time before we had another woman on the court. So that was my concern. And it was my husband who said, oh, for heaven's sakes, you'll do fine. Don't be silly. Come on. So I said yes, and I was duly sworn in at the court. And President and Mrs. Reagan came to the Supreme Court for that ceremony. They were seated right there as close as I am to you on the front row. And it was so touching to see them, and my 3 children and husband were down there close by. And it was a very special occasion indeed. Presidents don't like to have oaths of office administered at the Supreme Court to new justices. Why? No television in the courtroom. And they like the publicity of the television. And that's why these days you will see those ceremonies conducted in the White House where they have plenty of TV cameras. And they still don't at the Supreme Court. But President Reagan didn't mind that. He said that's where it ought to be, and he was there with his wife, and I thought that was wonderful of him. really, because it really is a ceremony that belongs there. And I served for 25 years, and my wonderful husband, who was the one who said, oh yes, do it, you have to do it. He got a bad disease, it's called Alzheimer's. Your memory leaves you, and your brain stops functioning properly, and eventually it brings an end to the life of the person with Alzheimer's. And we managed for my husband's care pretty well for quite a long time. And he reached the stage where he absolutely had to be in a care center for full-time care. And I wanted him back in Phoenix, where we had lived for so many years. So I retired from the Supreme Court at that point. And we did manage to put my husband in a care center in Phoenix, where he died not too long after, but he was well cared for. And there I was without a job. So what to do? There are a lot of offers of organizations that would like to have a Supreme Court, even an ex-Supreme Court justice, help them in some way. But it seemed to me that the best possible use of my time would be spent in trying to educate young people about how our government works. What I had learned over a period of time is that young people were not well informed about how our government works and what's going on. In fact, less than half of 8th graders know the purpose of the Bill of Rights, as you said in the introduction, but it's right there in the name, for heaven's sakes. It's the Bill of Rights. Now, only 7% of these high schoolers can name the 3 branches of government. Now, that's pretty scary. Do you know that to become a citizen of the United States from another country, you have to take a test all about our government and how it works and what it is? It's a hard test. Our high school graduates can't begin to pass that test. But that's what we require of somebody to become a citizen. So we have work to do. We really do. We must do better than we did. And we lived so far out of town on the Lazy Bee Ranch that we didn't have a school I could go to when I was little, and my parents sent me to live with grandparents in El Paso and go to school in El Paso, which I did. And we had civics every year. I can't remember a year without civics in that place. And most of it was boring as can be. And I got so tired of hearing about Stephen F. Austin that I just didn't want to go back to class. But anyway, Texas has a pretty colorful history, and I can understand why the teachers wanted to focus on it. But I did learn something in school, in grade school and high school, about civics, and that's more than is happening today. So we also know that young people your age, now tell me if you agree after I tell you what the figures are that we have, that you spend about an average of 40 hours a week in front of some kind of a screen, television and or computer. Now, is that right? If you think it is, raise your hand. Yeah, I think it's right. See? I know. Okay, well, you know what? I only need about 1 hour a week from you. You can give me that, don't you think, in front of a screen? You can give me 1 hour. And you can dial in a website. It's www.icivics.org. And you know what's on it? Games. Games. And you like to play games on your computers. So you dial in, you promise me that you will, and you play those games on iCivics. And I guarantee you that you're going to learn something from those games. They're fun, and they're also a great teaching tool. So when you leave today and get back to your screen, dial up iCivics and start those games. I think we have found an engaging way for young people to learn, and that's what we're trying to do, and we're making links with people across the country to try to make that happen. Now, are we going to have some questions from these students? Is that our plan? Okay. Well, I think some of you want to ask me some things. Now, I don't know if I can answer, but I'll try. So how are we going to operate this?
I'm going to come back up on stage.
Okay. All right. Anyway. You want me here?
And then, yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad all of you are here, and I guess we're going to hear some of your questions, if I'm not mistaken.
Excellent, yeah. So just a little note on the way that the question and answer is going to work. So we're going to be taking questions both from our live audience of students here, 700 of you or so, and we have microphones on the lower level with some of our staff who is there to help you out, and a couple of microphones up on the upper level. So if you have a question you'd like to ask the Justice, don't be shy. You can get up and get in line, and we'll go around. We also have an online audience of students who's tuned into this, and I have a little monitor here that's going to help me choose some questions. And I think we're going to start off with an online question to give you, a minute or two to work up the courage to stand up in front of 700 of your closest friends and ask a question to a living legend. So,
forget that last part. He didn't mean it. Okay.
Okay. So our first question. Our first question comes from our online audience, and it asks, what do you see your legacy as being?
Well, the first woman to serve on the Supreme Court. Now, it only took 191 years for that to happen. That's all it took. And thank goodness it did happen finally, because believe it or not, 50% of the people in this country are what? They're female. And the other 50 are male. And I think most people in the country look around at their public offices of governance, their legislative bodies and their city councils and their officials, and they like to see both men and women on those bodies, not just all one. And for a long time, it was all one, it was all male. And when I came along, that was still kind of the way it was. Certainly, as I told you, for 191 years, it had been that way on the Supreme Court. So it was time that people could see some openness in the process that would allow women as well as men to serve.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. So once again, if you want to ask a question, you don't have to raise your hand or anything. You can just walk right up. It looks like, I'm looking upstairs to see if we have one. I think we have another question coming in from online. And this one has to do with the legal system in general. So one of the books that Justice O'Connor wrote is called The Majesty of Law. And one of the great parts of law is it allows you to kind of look at a circumstance and measure it against the law. But the question that comes in from online says that many think that the legal system allows those with more money to hire superior lawyers, and that in some way the law is kind of slanted towards them. So do you have any thoughts on that as it applies to the legal system and what you saw before?
Well, I am going to try to make a question out of that. I'm not sure what the question is, but it may relate to cases that come to the Supreme Court and whether they come to us in a fair, reasonable manner. And anyone who has had a question of federal law decided in a case in the lower state or federal courts, if you have a legal problem and you've gone to court at the state level or in the lower federal courts, and if you lose in those courts, you can file a petition with the United States Supreme Court and say, please take my case. This is the issue of federal law. This is what happened in the lower courts. We think it's an important issue that the Supreme Court needs to resolve. And that goes to all 9 justices. It's filed along with briefs, which aren't brief at all. They're long written arguments spelling it all out. And they ask the court to take the case. And it takes the agreement of 4 of the 9 justices to take a case at the court. It doesn't require a majority. 4 of the 9 will do it. So when you file a petition, you hope you can get at least 4 votes to take the case. And if they do, then the court has to decide it. And you make your arguments in written form, called briefs, and they aren't brief, they're long. And an oral argument is available at the court for at least an hour at the court. And so then the justices have to sit down together, all 9, and decide the case. And a majority of the 9 means 5. You need 5 to have a holding of the court. All right, you have some people lined up over here. We better get to their questions.
Hello, my name is Isau Parra, and I attend Crenshaw High School. And I want to know, how effective is that Civics game in teaching students?
Well, thank you for asking. I think you're asking the wrong person. I think it's terrific. I think they really learn. And actually, we've had it tested to see if it is effective, and we're told by the people who run the test that it is very effective in teaching. And part of it is because the games are engaging and fun, and we've based them on real situations that could arise, and we think we've done a pretty good job on that. So I think you'll think it's effective. Okay, you're gonna go.
Yeah, let's head over here.
Hi, I'm Mario Bannon. I attend Sierra Canyon School. I was wondering, when you were appointed a justice, it was really difficult for women. Do you feel like women now that are trying to become lawyers in the Supreme Court or anything, we have a better chance?
Absolutely, you have a better chance. Well, of course, let me just start with the Supreme Court. 191 years, no woman, then me, another 12 years, finally a second woman, Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I retire, and today we have 3 women on the U.S. Supreme Court. 3! So, it's definitely better there, and it's definitely better all across the globe in terms of opportunities for women, thankfully. Okay, you've got more.
My name is Noah Davila, and I attend St. Mill School. Justice O'Connor, you must have had many struggles in becoming a Supreme Court justice. In your opinion, what personal strengths and character traits did you draw from to help you overcome those struggles?
Well, I was a ranch girl. I had to do the work out there, believe me. You had to do a lot by yourself. You were assigned to go out and find some cow and calf that needed help, and they were 15 miles off, and you had to go find them and bring them back. You had to help in so many ways on that ranch. And if they asked you to do something, you were responsible. And believe me, if you didn't do it well enough, you'd hear about it forever. So you learn how to take responsibility if you work on a ranch. And I think maybe that helped me in life. I'm pretty sure it did. I hope you have things that you have to do where you can be responsible, because it makes a difference. Thanks for asking.
Maybe go up, we have a question up in the mezzanine level there.
We do?
Yep.
My goodness, I'm not looking in all the right places. Where, oh, I can't even see you, the lights are so bright. Okay,
Hello,
try.
my name is Tylen Kelly, and I represent Doherty High School. And in representing Doherty High School, I just want to take this time to thank you. We really appreciate you taking this time to come talk to us. But my actual question was, what motivated you to be all that you are today?
Oh, I don't know, because I grew up on a ranch and was used to doing things. and it didn't matter on that ranch whether I was a girl or a boy. The work had to be done, and they didn't care. Somebody had to do it, and that was the thing. So I just thought the rest of life ought to be the same. And when I went to Stanford as an undergraduate, and I took a class from a marvelous law professor who taught one class at Stanford to non-legal students. And he was the most inspiring professor I ever had. And because of his class and because of him, I decided, oh, well, I don't know any lawyers, but it sounds like a good thing to me. And I applied to law school at Stanford. And I didn't know if I'd get in or not. And to my great surprise, they took me. So there I was. And so I thought, well, I'd better start this. And having started, I'd better finish. You can't leave midway. So I finished. And then I was prepared to try to do something in the practice of law. And I will tell you that it was hard in those days. I got out of law school in 1952, and there were notices on the placement bulletin board at Stanford Law School, and they were from every major law firm in California. Stanford Law graduates, call us. We want to talk to you about a job. Call us. There were at least 40 of those on the bulletin board, and I called 40 phone numbers of law firms to ask for an interview. Not a single one would even give me an interview. I was female. They wouldn't even talk to me. And they had these notices on the bulletin board. I had a friend at Stanford from undergraduate days whose father was a partner in a big California law firm. And I went to her and I said, talk to your father and see if he would get me an interview in the law firm he was with. And she did, and he got me an interview. And I made the trip to Los Angeles, down here, talked to the distinguished partner. Oh, Miss Day, you have a fine resume here, Miss Day. But Miss Day, this firm has never hired a woman lawyer. I don't see the day when we will. And I looked shocked. And he said, well, our clients wouldn't stand for it. And that was where I was. And I needed a job because I'd gotten engaged to John O'Connor. He was a year behind me, and we both liked to eat, and that meant one of us was going to have to work, and that was me. So I heard that the district attorney, county attorney in San Mateo County, California, had once had a woman lawyer on his staff. And so I wrote him a letter and made an appointment to see him. And he was a very nice man. He was Italian-American, and they still elect county attorneys in California. It's an elected office. Anyway, he'd been there for a while, and he couldn't have been nicer. And he said, oh, you have a fine resume, Miss Day. I did have a woman lawyer in my office at one time, and she did a good job. I'd be happy to have another one, and you have a good record here. I'd be happy to have you. But I get my money from the County Board of Supervisors, and I'm not funded to hire another deputy. What can I do? And so I went back to the Lazy Bee Ranch because I was getting ready for our wedding out there. And I wrote him a long letter that's now in the museum. And I said, I told him the things that I thought I could do well in the office if he hired me. And I said, I know you don't have any money, but I'll work for you for nothing. You don't have to pay me a dime until such time as you have a little money and you can pay something. That's all right with me. And he said, you know, I don't have an office to put anybody else. And I said, I know you don't have a vacant office, but I met your secretary. She's very nice, and I'd be happy to put my desk in the secretary's office if she doesn't object. That was my first job as a lawyer. No pay, and I put my desk in with the secretary. But you know what? I loved my job. I got such interesting legal questions to try to answer. I just loved every minute of my job. So it just, in those days, a woman had to maybe make some special efforts to get some kind of work, but I'm glad I did, and it all worked out.
All right. I want to take another online question, then we'll come back to our one. So a question that's coming in from online is, there are certainly flaws in any legal system. So do you think, is there an area of our legal system that you think is most in need of change?
Oh goodness, I wish I'd had time to think about that. There are areas that need improvement. We've made certain areas of the law very, very complex and hard for the average citizen or anybody else to know what the law really is or how it affects them. And I think we need to focus a little bit on less but more explanatory legal provisions in many areas of the law than we have today. We've made it so complex that many people can't even begin to understand what they are, the requirements, and I think we could do a little better in many areas. I'm not going to try to single one out.
Okay, thank you. So let's go back to our student audience. Let's go over here.
Tax law, for one. Whew, help. Okay.
Hi, my name is Victor Smith, and I'm from Crenshaw High School. One, I would like to say that I respect your passion and dedication that you have into doing everything.
Thanks.
Secondly, my question is, what were some of the hardest challenges you had to face getting your BA and your LLB at Stanford University?
What challenges did? Well, I had a challenge to get in the first place. I went to high school in El Paso, Texas. And out of my entire high school class, I was the only student to apply for out-of-state admission to college. The only one. And I don't think Stanford had any reason in the world to accept my application. I had good grades in high school, and I was engaged in various activities, and maybe it's because nobody else applied to Stanford from El Paso, Texas, I don't know. Anyway, to my relief and surprise, they took me, and I'm glad they did. But anyway, it's hard to get in, and I wish you luck when you apply, because it's not easy. I think it helps in high school if you learn how to write well. Now, most teachers don't like to teach creative or writing because it's harder. It's more homework to do to correct people on their writing skills. But it is one of the most important things you can learn. So if you have a chance in school, learn to write well. The other thing I want you to do is learn how to read fast. I took a speed reading course, and boy, I can whiz through a book in a day, or several in a day. And that really helps as you go on. It really does. So why don't you learn to read fast and to write well? You may have to take an extra course or two to do that, but that's all right. You'll be glad you did.
Thank you. Let's go over here.
Good morning. My name is Shannon Hannon. I attend Crenshaw High School. My question is, being a woman in such a hard economy, how did you deal with all the stress and how many people was going against you and doubting all the abilities you have? How did you get through it?
Well, I didn't grow up when the economy was in as much of a downturn as you are. We're in an economic time today when we're in a somewhat of a downturn in our national economy, and jobs are scarce. When I went to school and graduated, it was the end of World War II, and we were just getting out from under the war. And so it was kind of a new opportunity for our country, and it wasn't as difficult to get a job as it is for you today. And that's why I think it's important that while you're in school, you learn to read fast and write well, because you may have to use those skills when you get a job, okay? It's harder than it was for me.
Let's go.
Hi, my name is Catherine Nofsiger, and I go to Boyna High School. And my question is, do you feel there's a particular area where civic engagement is lacking? If so, which area, and what do you suggest to increase and encourage more active involvement?
Well, I think the whole thing is lacking. I mean, when you look at the statistics, barely a third can name the 3 branches of government, much less say what they do. I mean, it's lacking across the board. So we need broad understanding of how our government works and what makes it function and how does it function. Now, I hate to say this, it's sad really, but many of the job opportunities are in the public sector. They're not all in the private sector. Today, when you get a job, you may well end up working for the state, the county, the city, or the federal government. There are more public jobs in some ways than there are in the private sector. So you better learn about the public sector and how it works and what they do. It's terribly important that you do. Now, do we have somebody else up top? I can't see him.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Justice O'Connor. My name is Dominique Rogers, and I represent Doherty High School. And my question is, when you were in office, what made you take a stand for minorities?
What's the question?
When you were in office, what made you take a stand for minorities?
Take a stance for minorities. Yeah. When I was in the legislature, I was in the Arizona State Senate. And we had, at that time, the Equal Rights Amendments circulating around the country, asking states to ratify it. And that got a bit controversial, because nobody knew where an adoption of that amendment would lead. Maybe you couldn't even have separate restrooms in public facilities, like here at the Reagan Library. And people got a little nervous. So what it did make us do is to start looking at all our laws and seeing, did they discriminate clearly against the female sex. At least that's what I wanted to do. And the other thing that you did was to see if it discriminated against people of certain ethnic backgrounds, against African Americans, against Asian Americans. What did it really do? And we had to start looking at that. But for the male-female distinctions, what I did in Arizona, because I held a position in the legislature, which gave me a little clout, we went through every single statute in the state of Arizona, and we pulled out every one that discriminated on the basis of gender. And we offered an amendment to correct it for every single one of those laws. And by golly, I got it passed. Now, how's that? Pretty effective.
For our next question, I want to go back to our online question, and this one comes in, and it's actually about a current event. So it says, in what circumstances should there be limits to First Amendment rights, in particular talking about the Occupy movement that's happening across the country?
Well, there's no way to answer that, in what circumstances. The First Amendment is pretty critical. It protects our basic fundamental rights. I mean, let's see how it's worded. Where's my purse? Somebody brought it. Who's got it? Somebody brought my purse in here. May I have my purse? Okay. All right. Now, here we are. I knew I brought it. Now, just a minute. I've got to look for a second. Find something. Hard to find. Have you ever tried to find anything in a woman's purse? Don't start it. It's impossible. All right. This is what I carry with me always. You know what it is? It's the Constitution of the United States. Now, I hope you get one. I want every one of you to have one of these, and I hope your schools, are there any people here representing your schools, any faculty or anybody?
Yeah.
Tell them that if I had the power now, which I don't, I'd put out a court order telling the schools they had to give you a constitution to carry. All right, here's the First Amendment. Now, it's addressed not to states, but to Congress. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. Well, that's what it's talking about. Now, we've got an issue today. What do they call those occupying people and all this? What do they call themselves?
The Occupy.
I don't know. There are some protests going on, and there's a movement that calls themselves occupiers, and they have been setting up tent cities and so forth. Now, there's a dandy First Amendment question, because many cities are saying, what can we do? They've taken over our parks. They set up tents and they're living there. So the citizens can't go in and use the parks. Now, there's a dandy First Amendment question for you. Now, you go back to school and you talk about that, because there's a perfect First Amendment issue for you. And I'm sure the courts are going to be having to address that. And they're going to have to find some way to thread through. You can't prevent citizens from going in public areas and gathering and saying, we don't like what you're doing, state or city. We think you ought to do something else. We think you ought to change your policies on this, from that to this. I mean, that is protected in the First Amendment. But it probably is not protected to allow you to set up a tent and live there day in and day out in the park. You know, there are some limits, even though they're not written in. But that's a perfect question, and I hope you go back to your schools and talk about that one.
Excellent. Okay, let's go back down here.
My name is Federico Gaetan, and I'm representing High Tech LA. In terms of the Wall Street movement, how do you think that movement is reflecting our society and, yeah, basically?
What movement? You describe it for me.
The Occupy Wall Street movement.
Well, what do you mean by the Wall Street movement? Tell me what you're talking about.
The movement you were just talking about.
The one I was just talking about. Okay. And your question is, what are the limits?
How does it, what do you think our society is trying to say through that movement?
I don't know. I'm not part of it. I don't know. And I don't think the people occupying the park speak for everybody in the country. I think you have to ask, first of all, the people themselves who are in the parks, what is it you want to achieve? What do you think we're doing wrong? What is it you want to achieve? Let's define it first. I'm not sure I know what it is. But they don't speak for everyone in the country. They speak for a specific thing, and we need to get their goals and concerns defined to start with. And they may have some valid goals, and we ought to start talking about them. But does that enable them to set up tents and live in the park? Perhaps not. We're going to see a lot of questions arising out of that.
My name is Lana Zimmerman, and I attend St. Mel School. Justice O'Connor, what advice would you give to a young girl today who would like to follow in your career path?
Well, the same thing I followed. Learn as much as you can in school. Learn to write well. Learn to read fast. Learn to be a good student. And then see if you can't get a job when you finish school at something worth doing. My goal in life, I'll tell you what it was. It was to work at work worth doing. I knew I wanted to work, but I wanted whatever work I settled in, I wanted to feel that that was work that was worthwhile, something worth doing. And when I went to work for the Attorney General in Arizona, I felt, yes, that was one of my early jobs. I thought it was really worth doing. When I got in the legislature and worked there, yes, I thought that was worth doing. And it wasn't too bad. When I got on the Supreme Court, that was probably worth doing, don't you think? But even at the bottom level, whatever it is, and my first job I had to create for myself. I had to open a law office, hang out a shingle with one partner, pay the rent, hire a secretary, and hope to get business. And it wasn't the kind of questions that usually come to the US Supreme Court. It was landlord-tenant problems, marital problems, all things like that. But that was work worth doing, actually, because I got to learn a lot about our way of life and our society and people's problems. Okay?
All right. Let's go here, and then we'll go up there.
Good morning, Justice O'Connor. My name is Mohammed Sazi, representing High Tech High. And I would like to ask you, what is your opinion on Obamacare, since the justices currently are talking about?
Oh, I don't know. I don't know what is contained in that long, complicated law. I'm waiting for the court decision that's coming to the Supreme Court. And you know what I'm going to do if I get a chance? I'm going to try to be in Washington, D.C., and sit in the courtroom for part of that oral argument. And I'll try to find out just what it is at issue, because I'm curious too. I don't know what's all engaged. Most major nations in the world today have some kind of comprehensive medical care provisions for their citizens. Most nations do. We don't, and I guess this was an effort to provide a broader medical care coverage for people than we've had in the past, and to direct that from the federal level. And I really don't know what's all in it, but we're going to find out more when the court hears it. I think the arguments are scheduled in March. And it's a very complex case that they took. The court has set 5 hours for oral argument. I don't remember anything like that in my lifetime. So it must be a pretty complicated case. It must have many questions attached to it, or they wouldn't have had to set 5 hours for oral argument. So tune in, and I am going to, too.
Thank you.
All right. Let's go upstairs, please.
Okay?
Hello, my name is Patrick Brohart, and I represent Duarte High School. And what I was really wondering is what exactly went through your mind as being announced the second most powerful woman in the country at your time?
Oh, well, that's absurd. That's what went in my mind. I had a good job, but it didn't rank at that level. Okay.
Hi, my name is Amanda Miano. I represent
represent Cornerstone Christian School. And my question was, if based on your conscience you found an act or behavior immoral, yet based on the rule of law you believed you had to rule in favor of that which you found immoral, how would you reconcile your conscience with what
Well,
you
I wouldn't.
perceive
I'd get off the court if I had that problem. I'd say I don't belong there. You have to decide questions of law. Law, not personal opinion, not your conscience. You hope that your answer is one that would satisfy your own personal standards as well. But if it doesn't, you are constrained by this Constitution. See it? I'm holding it. And if my opinion is different, I wouldn't have written it that way, so I'm not going to follow it. You don't have that leeway as a member of the court or a judge. You don't. So that's an easy question to answer.
We actually have time for just one more question. I know
Okay,
there's a lot of
where's it coming from?
So we're going to go to this gentleman right here.
Uh-oh, you've got a big job there.
Hello, Justice O'Connor. My name is Amita Kula, and I attend Arcadia High School. My question is this. I read this really unique quote that said that you are, quote, a moderating voice, hesitant to expand the law in either direction. What prompted you to be more politically neutral, and what made you be known as the swing vote?
I hate that term, swing vote. You know, oh, well, I'm up here one day, I'm over there the next. That is a terrible term. As though you have a choice on the bench. I didn't have a choice. We had to decide issues on the Supreme Court of federal law. It could be interpreting some law passed by Congress, and there you are governed by the language of the law that Congress passed. And what we know of, anyway, was the intent of Congress. If there's some uncertainty about it, what was Congress intending? And we can look at the record to find that out. And if it's a constitutional issue, my goodness, we've been in business a long time. We have over 200 years of legal precedents to follow. This nation is a common law country. I bet you all don't even know what that is. Great Britain's a common law country. We fashioned our system after theirs. Our understanding is that we are bound by the law as articulated by previous decisions of the Supreme Court and the other governing appellate court decisions. We aren't free to ignore what's been decided in the past. If a decision has been decided and it's still out there, it hasn't been reversed or changed, we're bound by it. And that makes us part of a common law nation. We aren't just free to say, oh, well, that's a good idea, we'll do it. There are legal principles out there that we have promised to follow in our system of government. And it all starts right here. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so I have just some brief closing remarks, but I just want to make kind of a logistical point here that after we're done, we're going to ask Justice O'Connor and her guests to exit the facilities, and I ask that you remain seated, and someone from our staff, the lovely and talented Miss Elisa Whiteley, manager of the Discovery Center, will come up and dismiss you by school, so please just wait in your seat until that happens. And I want to thank you, students, those of you who have joined us here in person and those of you who have joined us online, for engaging in this sort of public discussion. This is a good starting point for you. You have some follow-up homework from the Justice. You have to go to iCivics.org tonight when you get home for 1 hour. That's all we ask.
An hour a week.
An hour a week.
Yeah, there we go. That's better.
And upon her confirmation in the Senate, which, by the way, was a unanimous 99-0 vote, with only Senator Baucus from Montana who was absent, right?
He wrote me a letter afterwards, and he said, I'm sorry I wasn't there for the vote. I was going to vote for you, and he sent me a copy of A River Runs Through It to read. So you might read that, too. Pretty good.
It's a good book. So President Reagan said, Judge O'Connor is, as I have come to know her personally, a very warm and brilliant woman who has an outstanding career in Arizona. I know the court and the nation will benefit both from her lifetime of work, service, and experience in the legal profession, and from her solid grasp of the Constitution. As you saw, she has it in her purse. 30 years later, Justice O'Connor, you fulfilled and exceeded each and every expectation mentioned by President Reagan. The court, the nation, each and every student in this audience, myself, we thank you for joining us today, and we thank you very much. So please join me in thanking Justice Sandra.
Wait a minute. Now, wait. I really appreciate being here, and I think President Reagan was one of our great presidents, and I felt so privileged to have been able to meet him and see him on a number of occasions, and I thought he was a very gifted and able president, and I feel very privileged in my lifetime to have been able to be engaged in public service. And I want each one of you now to think about what you can do in life at work worth doing, okay? Thank you.